I had just come back from a week-long hiking trip through the Sierra Nevada mountains. My boots still caked in dried mud and my flannel sticking to my back from the drive. When I turned the corner onto my gravel driveway and slammed the brakes, in disbelief, white chairs in perfect rows, tables decorated in pink and gold satin, a massive floral arch standing proudly on my back pasture, and at least 200 strangers milling around like this was some kind of magazine shoot. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I had taken the wrong turn or hit my head on the trail, but no, this was definitely my land, my fence, and my damn barn in the background being used as a cocktail bar. A parking sign even pointed guests to a makeshift lot right over the area where I'd just planted new wildflowers, before I could even process what I was looking at. A DJ's voice boomed through a speaker system I didn't own, followed by a shrill voice yelling, "Cue the bridal party." And a flood of formally dressed guests turned their heads toward a marching bride and groom who were literally walking across the top of my septic system. My jaw dropped. I hadn't rented out my property. I never allow events on my land.
I live
on the outskirts of a quiet, rural lakefront community that's governed by an HOA group already, notorious for trying to control everything from fence colors to where people park their bikes. And right there, smiling at the couple as if she'd orchestrated a royal wedding, was none other than Karen Whitmorth, the president of the HOA. Her lavender pantsuit and headset mic made her stick out like a sore thumb among the guests. She was directing the entire ceremony like some deranged pageant mom. I didn't know whether to scream, laugh, or call the cops. I slowly stepped out of my truck, boots crunching on gravel, and the moment my door shut, Karen turned her head, eyes locking on mine, like she'd just seen a ghost. "Oh, hi," she chirped, trotting over, completely ignoring the look of pure outrage on my face. "You're back a little early, aren't you?" That was it. That was her first sentence. Not an apology, not an explanation. Just a comment about my schedule, as if that gave her the right to throw a 210-guest wedding on my private property. "What the hell is this?" I asked, my voice sharp and low, barely controlled. She gave me a tight smile, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeve like she was too busy for drama. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just one evening. The bride's aunt lives in the neighborhood, and I promised her we'd find a charming rustic spot for the reception. You were out of town, and well, it's not like you used this space for anything." I felt my fists clench involuntarily. I'd spent years building this property, clearing the brush by hand, restoring the old barn into a guest house, planting native grass and trees to protect the local ecosystem, and here she was, telling me it was unused. "You broke into my gate," I growled. "You let strangers trample over my land. You set up a commercial-grade event without a single word to me. That's not just rude, that's illegal." She had the nerve to roll her eyes and glance over her shoulder as the couple posed for photos with my barn as a backdrop. "You should be honored," she said. "Your land has never looked better. Plus the photographers tagging the location-free exposure for you." The audacity made my head spin. I stepped past her, storming into the crowd of people who barely gave me a second glance. I was just the guy in flannel boots, who clearly didn't fit in with the tuxedos and designer dresses. I walked straight to the catering station unplugged, the power cord running to one of my outlets, and turned to the stunned caterer. "You need to leave now." He glanced nervously toward Karen, who was now speed-walking over with a mixture of panic and indignation. "Sir, we're just doing our job," he stammered. "We were told this was all approved." "It's not," I barked. "You're trespassing." Karen caught up to us, her headset bobbing wildly. Okay, let's not be rash. Everyone's having a good time. No one's damaging anything. Can't we just let it finish and talk about this tomorrow?" That's when I lost it. "You don't get to ask for grace after hijacking my property for a wedding?" I shouted. Heads began turning now. The music cut out. Conversation stopped. Even the bride paused mid-photo with a forced smile. Karen's fake charm fell away as she realized the scene was unraveling. "Call 911, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's get the sheriff out here and see what they think. About your little celebration?" That was when the panic finally hit her face. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I absolutely would." I pulled out my phone, but before I could hit the dial button, a young woman in a wedding dress came. running over, nearly tripping on her heels. "Please," she gasped. "Please don't ruin my wedding. We didn't know this was unauthorized. Karen told us she got permission." I looked at her tearful eyes, the groom running over behind her, and I felt a pit open in my stomach. They'd been duped too. This wasn't their fault. But that didn't mean it was okay. I lowered the phone, sighed deeply, and said, "You've got 15 minutes to wrap it up. Not a second more." Ack! Karen opened her mouth to argue, but one glare shut her down. The guests began scrambling. People grabbed plates of food and quickly. 8 others rushed to take last-minute photos. The band awkwardly played a final tune while the bride tearfully thanked me again and again. Karen, meanwhile, looked like she just swallowed a lemon whole. I stood by my truck, arms crossed, until the last vehicle pulled off my land and the caterers packed the last chair. As the final string lights came down, Karen came slinking over. "Look, let's just forget this happened. I'll make it up. To you, how about a year of waived HOA dues?" I stared at her, speechless. "Karen," I said slowly, "you broke the law. You violated property rights. You embarrassed me in front of an entire crowd of strangers." Her expression changed, the false kindness slipping away into something darker. "Careful how hard you push," she said under her breath. "You're not exactly HOA royalty around here. I can make things very difficult for you." I gave a half smile, stepped closer, and said, "You just made a massive mistake thinking I'm someone who can be intimidated." She stormed off, without another word. That night, I reviewed security footage from the trail cams. They had removed my chain gate with bolt cutters, brought in rental trucks, used my electricity, my Wi-Fi, even my guest house for the bridal party to change in. It wasn't just trespass. It was a coordinated invasion. And Karen's fingerprints were all over it. I stayed up until 2 a.m. compiling every piece of evidence into a digital file labeled Operation Wedding Crashers. And I promise you this, it's only just getting started. If you've ever dealt with an HOA president like Karen, the kind who thinks your land is her playground, make sure you subscribe to Sham Stories right now, because you won't believe what I found next. The real story behind this wedding goes far deeper than flowers and fancy cake. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of a diesel engine idling outside my front gate. Through the slats of the bedroom blinds, I spotted a white utility truck emblazoned with the logo Community Compliance Unit, Pine Creek HOA. It looked official at first glance, but I knew the HOA didn't have any legal authority to operate such a unit. Karen must have had decals made and slapped them onto a rented vehicle to push whatever intimidation campaign she had planned. 2 men in matching polos and clipboards stepped out, casually surveying my property like code enforcement agents on a mission. I didn't even bother putting on shoes. I stormed out the front door, barefoot and furious, waving my phone in their direction. "If you're not with the county, you're trespassing.
I'll leave.
Or I'll call the sheriff," I barked. One of them blinked nervously and held up his hand. "We're just here to do a visual assessment on behalf of the HOA president. Some concerns were raised about unauthorized fencing and unregistered guest structures." I laughed. "Ah!" A cold, sarcastic laugh that made them both flinch.
No.
"You mean the barn your president used as a dressing room for her illegal wedding?" they exchanged. Uncertain looks. "We're not involved in that," the taller one muttered. I snapped a picture of their truck, their faces, and their clipboards. "Good. Then turn around and drive away before I forward this to the real authorities." They left without another word, tires crunching gravel as they pulled out. Wasn't going to let this drop. I spent the next few hours combing through the HOA's online documentation, downloading every bylaw, policy amendment, and board meeting minute I could find. And what I found made my blood run cold. Just 1 month prior, Karen had pushed through an emergency amendment, giving herself temporary executive privileges to authorize short-term use of community-adjacent private land for HOAs, sanctioned events if the landowner was not present to respond in a timely manner. It was written in vague, manipulative language designed to exploit situations exactly like mine. Worse still, the board meeting that passed it listed no other members. Present only Karen's name, marked as proxy for absent board. In other words, she passed it herself. I contacted my attorney, a sharp woman named Dana, who had helped me settle a zoning dispute last year. I sent her everything: photos, videos, documents, even a screenshot of Karen's social media post, bragging about hosting the wedding of the year on the most exclusive land in Pine Creek. Within minutes, Dana called me back. "You're not just dealing with HOA drama," she said. "You're looking at trespassing, property misuse, fraudulent representation, and potentially civil conspiracy. We can absolutely take action." That same day, I filed an official police report. 2 uniformed deputies came to the property, took statements, and reviewed the footage. They were stunned when they saw Karen's face pop up in multiple frames, directing people around my land. Like a wedding planner on a power trip. "You want to press charges?" one of them asked. "Absolutely," I said. "And I want to file for a restraining order if possible." Things moved quickly after that. I received confirmation that the sheriff's office had opened an investigation. Dana submitted a cease and desist letter to the HOA and Karen personally, demanding no further contact and full accountability for the unauthorized event. I assumed that would be the end of IT, or at least the beginning of a legal resolution. But I underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. That weekend, I received a letter taped to my door, not in an envelope, not mailed. Just taped there with packing tape like some kind of ransom note. It was written on Pine Creek HOA letterhead entitled, "Notice of Community Code Violations. Urgent Response Required." Inside were fabricated claims, improper soil retention, structure, unauthorized barn expansion, non-compliant lighting, and the worst, public endangerment via aggressive landscaping. Aggressive landscaping, I nearly choked. According to her complaint, my flower beds posed a tripping hazard for neighborhood children and obstructed natural sightlines necessary for wildlife monitoring. She had gone from wedding planner to delusional inspector in less than a week. I didn't take the bait. I forwarded the letter to Dana and went about my business. But then the real escalation began. First, a drone hovered over my backyard for 15 minutes while I was watering my plants. I couldn't see the operator, but it was obviously someone close enough to stream the footage. Then my internet connection started dropping only during Zoom calls or whenever I tried to send legal documents. I checked my modem and found a strange device plugged into the router's port 1 I hadn't noticed before. I yanked it out, and immediately the connection stabilized. I knew then that this wasn't just retaliation, it was surveillance. Karen had shifted from petty power moves to full-blown harassment.
Right.
That night, I called Marcus, my nephew who works in cybersecurity. For a government contractor, I didn't tell him everything, just that I suspected someone had compromised my home network and might be watching me. He came down the next morning with tools and scanners and spent 4 hours combing through my property. He found 3 hidden cameras, 1 embedded in a fake birdhouse, another mounted behind a tree near the fence line, and a 3rd positioned on a neighbor's shed aimed directly into my windows. We removed all of them and boxed them up. Whoever installed these had access to surveillance-grade tech, Marcus said. Not amateur stuff. This was done by someone with serious resources. I filed another report with the sheriff, adding the illegal surveillance to Karen's growing list of offenses. They took it seriously. One deputy promised to elevate it to the state level if it continued. But just when I thought the worst was over, the most unbelievable thing happened. A notice was posted on the HOA's community website announcing a special disciplinary hearing for willful non-cooperation and failure to maintain HOA standards. The accused, me. The hearing was to be held in the community clubhouse. Karen had called an open forum to smear me in front of the entire neighborhood, citing me as a disruptive element. She wanted to publicly shame me before the community, discredit my claims, and maybe pressure others into backing her. So I showed up. I walked into that room wearing a collared shirt, my boots polished, every document, photo, and legal file neatly stacked in a binder. Under my arm, Karen sat at the front like a queen on her throne, flanked by 3 board members who I knew barely attended meetings. "Mr. Callahan," she said with false sweetness, "you've been summoned to explain your behavior over the past 2 weeks and your lack of cooperation with community harmony." I stood at the podium, looked out at the rows of neighbors, some curious, others clearly they're out of obligation, and I took a deep breath. What I'm about to share will not only explain my behavior, I began. But it will explain exactly who's been abusing their position of power. Then I clicked my remote and started the presentation that would blow the lid off everything. She'd done from the wedding to the surveillance. And if you thought that was the end of it, the slideshow began with a still shot from the security footage Curran in a lavender dress holding a clipboard. Standing in front of my barn as guests gathered behind her in folding chairs, with white tents dotting the background, gasps echoed through the clubhouse. I moved to the next slide of drone's overhead view, showing my backyard fully staged for the wedding, complete with a DJ setup, lighting rigs, and buffet tables lined up along my back fence. This was not only unpermitted, I said calmly, but done entirely without my consent. I was out of town, and Karen Hayes took it upon herself to grant usage of private property she does not own. I flipped to another slide. Time the amendment she passed signed by only herself granting temporary access to community-adjacent land. This document, I added, is now under legal review for fraud and abuse of authority. Karen tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand and kept going. The next photo was of the two fake HOA compliance officers in the rental truck, followed by video of the hidden surveillance cameras Marcus found. A few neighbors turned to whisper at each other, some leaning away from Karen as if worried guilt might be contagious. Then came the kicker, recorded phone call Dana had made with the Pine Creek County office, confirming that the Community Compliance Unit truck had no record or connection to the county and was, in fact, rented through a private contractor. That sealed it. I closed the binder and faced the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand here not to accuse without evidence, but to ask why an HOA president has the power to rewrite rules for personal gain, hold secret weddings on private land, and surveil fellow residents without consequence. The room stayed quiet for a long moment, and Karen's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. One of the other board members, a mild-mannered man named Lewis, stood and said, "I move we adjourn this hearing until these matters are investigated properly." The motion passed quickly and people began to shuffle out. Karen tried to save face with small talk and fake smiles, but the crowd didn't return her energy. I didn't smile. I just walked out, binder in hand, and went home to wait for the fallout. The next 48 hours brought a storm. First, Karen tried to spin the story online, calling it a miscommunication gone viral and suggesting I had overreacted due to personal stress. But screenshots of her earlier bragging posts were already circulating and neighbors weren't buying the spin. Then came the HOA emergency board meeting without Karen. She'd been suspended pending the results of a formal review. I didn't attend, but Lewis called me afterward to say the vote had been unanimous. Her temporary executive privileges were revoked, and a neutral third party had been appointed to audit HOA activity for the last 6 months. That alone should have been enough, but Karen wasn't finished. A week later, I received a cease and desist letter in the mail, not from her, but from a law office representing a company called Lakeside Events and Rentals. According to the letter, I had caused defamation and disruption of a legal event, partnership, and owed damages for intentional interference with a business contract. I stared at the paper in disbelief. She had partnered with a wedding company using my land and was now claiming I'd cost them money. Dana laughed when I showed her the letter. "This is desperation," she said. "They don't have a leg to stand on." She fired off a response demanding proof of contract permits and landowner approval, which we knew they couldn't produce. A few days passed with no reply, but the silence was broken by something far worse. Someone dumped 2 massive loads of trash on my property: plastic plates, broken chairs, catering trays, and even a deflated inflatable swan float. I caught it on camera. A pickup truck with tinted windows backing in under cover of darkness, headlights off. I filed another police report. This time I insisted on pressing charges for illegal dumping, and I handed over the footage. That morning I got a call from a detective. "We're opening a full investigation," he said. "We may want to bring Ms. Hayes in for questioning." It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. It was about harassment, misuse of public roles, and potential fraud. Meanwhile, Marcus helped me install a full home security system with infrared cameras and smart locks. We weren't taking chances. And still, through it all, the community started to shift. Neighbors who had once been silent began to approach me on the sidewalk in the grocery store, even slipping notes into my mailbox. Some had stories of their own about Karen fining them for invisible violations, trying to buy land under market value, or threatening legal action for made-up infractions. The picture was forming. This wasn't a one-time abuse, it was a pattern. And when someone like that loses power, they become dangerous. One afternoon, I found a strange envelope left on my porch. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "You need to see this. Be careful. No name, no return address." Against my better judgment, I plugged it into a quarantine laptop Marcus had set up for sensitive files. The drive contained dozens of folders, videos, PDFs, scanned checks, and correspondence. It was a treasure trove of evidence. Karen's communications with Lakeside Events, voices listing my address as the venue, and even a spreadsheet labeled HOA leverage detailing fines issued to specific residents alongside notes like, "Offer lowball purchase after third notice." I forwarded it all to Dana and the sheriff's office. Then I made backup copies and locked them in a safe. That night I couldn't sleep. The air felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. Wasn't just dealing with someone drunk on power. I was dealing with someone who had built a house of cards out of lies, control, and intimidation, and I had just knocked the table. By the end of the week, the sheriff's department executed a search warrant at Karen's house. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from 3 different neighbors. Boxes were taken out, hard drives seized, and Karen was driven away in the back of a cruiser, though not handcuffed. Questioning only, they said. But it was enough to shake the neighborhood. To its core, the HOA board released a statement: full cooperation with law enforcement, suspension of all major HOA initiatives, and an invitation for residents to attend a town hall meeting where grievances could be aired. IRS VPD with one word: attending. What I planned to share would make everything before seem like child's play. And trust me, the next chapter is when the real truth begins to surface. The town hall meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. By the time I arrived, the Pine Creek Community Center parking lot was full. People were gathered in small groups on the lawn, murmuring, some clutching printouts or phones, others shaking their heads like they already knew they'd been part of something much darker than they realized. Inside, the air buzzed with a strange mixture of tension and anticipation. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, facing along a table where the remaining HOA board members sat, looking significantly less confident than the last time I'd seen them. Lewis, now acting president, gave a weak smile as I passed. I didn't smile back. This wasn't a social call. As the room filled to capacity, Lewis stood and tapped the mic. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight's meeting is to hear concerns from the community regarding recent HOA decisions and incidents. We want to reassure you that we take all complaints seriously and are cooperating fully with law enforcement." His voice shook slightly and I could see sweat beading on his forehead. The first to speak was a woman named Joyce, who lived 3 houses down from me. She clutched a binder so thick it could have stopped a bullet. "Karen fined me $2,500 last year for painting my shutters cream instead of almond," she began. I appealed. And the appeal hearing was just her and one other board member. She called her proxy. She opened the binder and flipped through photos, emails, and notices. Then she offered to waive the fine if I signed over a utility easement in my backyard. I didn't, and the fines doubled. A chorus of gasps rippled through the crowd. Another man stood next Scarl from the west end of the lake. She told me I couldn't install solar panels unless I used her approved vendor. That vendor charged triple the market rate and just so happened to be owned by her nephew. He held up receipts, printed quotes, and emails. When I refused, I got a violation letter claiming my existing roof tiles violated. Reflective harmony codes, whatever that means. One by one, neighbors rose and told their stories. Fake citations, pressure to sell, surveillance, secret fees. At least for others, claimed to have found cameras disguised as birdhouses or yard ornaments pointed at their homes. Each tale was worse than the last, and with every new voice, the weight of Karen's deceit grew heavier. I waited until nearly everyone had spoken before I rose from my seat and walked to the podium. The room quieted immediately. People turned in their chairs, eyes wide with expectation. I reached into my bag and pulled out the USB drive, the one with all the documents, videos, and spreadsheets that someone had anonymously delivered to my porch. I wasn't sure if I'd share this tonight, I began, but after hearing your stories, I think we all deserve to know just how deep this went. I connected the drive to the projector and opened the first folder labeled Karen, Private. The screen displayed an email thread between Karen and the Lakeside Events coordinator. In it, she negotiated usage of my property, referring to me as non-responsive, due to travel and claiming verbal consent under HOA Temporary Authority Clause. The crowd murmured in disbelief. I clicked to the next file scan of a handwritten checklist titled Property Targets 2023. My name was at the top. Others in the room gasped as they recognized their addresses. This, I said, is the list of homes Karen marked for forced sales or violations. All of you who've been fined, threatened, or approached about selling, you were on this list. I went through each folder, methodically recorded calls, photos, bank transfers, and even a voice memo where Karen ranted about her plans to modernize Pine Creek by replacing low-yield properties with profitable parcels. At one point, someone shouted from the back. She tried to buy my house after threatening to condemn my septic tank. Another cried, she offered to pay off my late dues if I let her hold a fundraiser in my yard. It was like a dam breaking. A room full of victims realizing they weren't alone. When I finished, Lewis stood again, face pale. I had no idea, he said. We thought she was just being strict, not running a personal scheme. I stared at him. He signed off on half her amendments. She told us they were procedural, said we needed to trust her judgment. And that's how this happened, I replied coldly. Blind trust, no oversight, and a predator in charge. The room erupted into shouts of agreement. People were no longer angry at just Karen. They were angry at the system that let her get away with it. That night, the HOA board voted to suspend all enforcement actions, freeze HOA dues, and hire a third-party auditing firm to review the last 2 years of operations. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. By the time I got home, my phone had exploded with messages, neighbors thanking me, others asking for help with their own cases, and one number I didn't recognize. I opened the voicemail and played it. Mr. Callahan, this is Detective Yates. We've reviewed the contents of your USB drive and cross-referenced it with the search warrant evidence. We'd like to speak with you tomorrow morning regarding a possible criminal referral. I saved the message and sat in silence. It wasn't over, not yet. But justice was closer than ever. The next morning, I met with Detective Yates at the Sheriff's Department. He thanked me for my cooperation and laid out what they had. Evidence of wire fraud, mail fraud, unauthorized surveillance, and potential RICO violations if they could prove Karen coordinated with vendors to defraud multiple homeowners. She's looking at serious charges, he said. You've done more than just protect your own rights. You've exposed a criminal enterprise. A few days later, local news caught wind of the story. The headline read, Wedding Scandal Uncovers HOA Corruption in Pine Creek. Karen's mugshot was plastered across TV screens and online articles. It wasn't just the community watching anymore, it was the whole county. Lakeside Events and Rentals released a public statement claiming they had no knowledge the land was unauthorized and that any misrepresentation by the host is under legal review. It didn't matter. The damage was done. One by one, neighbors filed civil claims. Dana offered to help coordinate a class action suit. I signed on without hesitation. I wasn't looking for money, I was looking for accountability. The HOA board, now under interim leadership, began discussing dissolution. Turns out, with enough votes from property owners, we could dismantle the entire organization and revert to county governance. It would take time and coordination, but people were motivated. The wedding that started this whole mess had unintentionally become a catalyst for a movement. Karen's empire was crumbling. Her power was gone. It was easy to believe the storm had passed once Karen was arrested, but I'd lived long enough to know that damage rarely ends when the wrecking ball leaves. Sometimes, the most dangerous parts are what get exposed after the dust settles. The days following the town hall meeting and Karen's detainment, Pine Creek fell into an eerie rhythm. Some neighbors celebrated, others tiptoed, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Despite the exposure of Karen's misconduct and the temporary freeze on all HOA activity, I knew from the contents of that USB drive there were still things lurking. In the shadows, names, transactions, and files that hadn't yet made the headlines. One of them was a spreadsheet titled LV Affiliates, which Dana and I initially dismissed as vendor contacts. But one late evening, as I studied the names, one stood out: M. Delano, Enforcement Lead. I cross-referenced it with Archived. HOA emailed and found that M. Delano had submitted dozens of violation notices to residents over the past year. Problem was, no one had ever met him, and his signature didn't match any known board member or officer. Curious. I called the phone number listed on the vendor directory, disconnected. Then I tried the address it led to a UPS store in a nearby town, box number 203. Dana filed a subpoena to access the rental information, and what we discovered widened. The scope of this mess beyond anything I expected. The box was rented under an alias and paid for in cash, but the security footage showed someone familiar: Karen's brother-in-law, Martin Kendrick, wearing sunglasses and a ball cap. Martin had served time for fraud in another county and conveniently moved into Pine Creek 6 months after Karen became HOA president. From that point on, violation notices spiked by nearly 300%. And a new wave of preferred vendors appeared, each tied back to Shell. LLCs with no track record and suspicious payment histories. As Dana dug deeper, she found checks written. 2 lakeside maintenance services which didn't even exist in state records. It had the same P.O. box number as Lakeside Events and Rentals. It was a web, and Karen wasn't the only spider. A few days later, a neighbor named Evelyn came to my door, shaking. She held up an envelope she found in her mailbox, no postage, just her name scrawled on the front. Inside were photos of her grandchildren playing in her yard, taken from behind the trees. A note read, "Some people should be careful where they dig." Evelyn was terrified. I took the photos and immediately called Detective Yates. He had a patrol car outside her house by nightfall and opened a separate investigation into potential intimidation. But it confirmed what I feared: someone was still trying to silence people. That night, I reviewed the files again, more carefully this time. I stumbled on a voice memo buried in an unnamed folder. It was scratchy, recorded on a phone, but clear enough to recognize the voices. Karen and Martin. "Just tell them it's a noise violation," Martin's voice said. "No one reads the rules anyway," Karen replied. "We'll keep stacking. Fines until they're ready to walk. Then you slide in with the offer. Easy." I forwarded the file to Yates. It was enough to shift their investigation from local corruption to potential racketeering. The next day, I was invited to a meeting with the district attorney. Dana came with me, and we sat across from a table full of prosecutors, each holding copies of the files we'd submitted. "We believe this goes beyond HOA misconduct," one said. "If we can prove these violations were issued as part of an organized effort to defraud homeowners and force sales, it could meet the threshold for a RICO case." My jaw tightened. "You mean like mafia-level charges? If the evidence holds," he nodded. Yes, it felt surreal. A neighborhood wedding scandal was about to crack open a full-blown criminal conspiracy. But before that happened, we had to ensure Karen and her affiliates didn't bury what was left. Yates suggested we notify the community carefully, so panic didn't spread. We planned a closed meeting for affected residents and set it for the following week at the community center. Word spread fast, and by that Saturday, over 60 homeowners RSVP'd. Some came with folders, others with tears. A woman named Rosa shared that she'd been told to sell within 30 days or face legal consequences. A young couple had been denied access to the neighborhood playground after refusing to pay a suspicious maintenance bond. A retired veteran was fined for his flagpole height, only to find the fine rescinded after signing an easement adjustment to land adjacent to his home. All these actions had one thing in common: pressure. Pressure to comply, pay, or give up. And behind every story, Karen or someone connected to her name appeared. After the meeting, a man in a worn flannel jacket approached me quietly. "Name's Hank," he said. "Used to do odd jobs for HOA maintenance. They paid cash, no paper trail." But I remember seeing Martin around with Karen. More than once. He handed me a receipt. This was the last payment I got. Take a look at the signature. I did. It was signed M. Delano. The alias. Again, Hank agreed to testify if needed. By now, Dana was working with a growing group of affected residents to build a civil case parallel to the criminal investigation. We started collecting statements, timelines, and video footage. Marcus helped design a secure portal for people to upload documents anonymously. Within 48 hours, we had 212 submissions, everything from bank transactions to voicemails, screenshots, and even audio recordings of Karen threatening homeowners with liens. Then came the bombshell. Former Lakeside Events employee named Jenna emailed Dana directly. "I quit last month," she wrote. "Didn't like what they were doing. I have photos, contracts, and a recording I think you need to hear." Jenna's testimony would later become the turning point of the entire investigation. She met with Yates and handed over a flash drive containing a full internal calendar labeled Event X Pine Creek. It outlined the wedding day from setup to teardown, with line items that included private land fee, $0 verbal clearance via HOA, and an invoice marked comped by Karen. Jenna also recorded a phone call between her manager and Karen where they discussed the guest list and the need for privacy from local authorities. That did it. Yates presented the new evidence to the district attorney, and a motion was filed to elevate the charges. Karen was officially indicted on 12 counts, including fraud, trespassing, illegal surveillance, and conspiracy to defraud property owners. The news broke like a thunderclap. Every media outlet in the state ran the story, and people began showing up at my door to thank me, apologize, or ask how they could help. Pine Creek's reputation was in shambles, but something better was emerging from its ruined solidarity. As we moved closer to dissolving the HOA, neighbors once divided by fences and petty rules started sharing tools, organizing yard cleanups, and planning a community garden. For the first time in years, the place felt like home. But just when I thought we were turning a corner, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sentence printed in bold red ink. "Not everyone wants Pine Creek free." It wasn't over yet. The letter wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. A reminder that even though Karen was gone, her influence hadn't vanished. Not everyone wants Pine Creek free. I stared at the red ink for a long time, then passed the envelope to Marcus, who scanned it and nodded grimly. "We need to assume whoever wrote this has something to lose," he said. And that means they're going to fight back. Over the following days, I reviewed the evidence we'd compiled, hoping to anticipate the next move. That's when I noticed a name that had slipped under the radar: Brian Hensley. His name appeared several times across different HOA meetings. Minutes' community consultant, but he never actually lived in Pine Creek. He'd been listed as a vendor for the HOA website redesign, landscaping plans, and even the infamous violation database. But there was no contractor ID, no business license, and no tax records under his name. Curious, I asked Dana to dig into him, and what she found confirmed my fears. Brian Hensley wasn't a consultant. He was the registered owner of 4 shell companies, including the now infamous Lakeside Events and Rentals and Lakeside Maintenance. More disturbingly, he had prior convictions for mail fraud and tax evasion in another state, which Karen likely knew about. My theory was that Karen hadn't acted alone. Brian had been her partner, maybe even the mastermind, running the operation. From behind the scenes, while she acted as the public face. If true, the criminal conspiracy we were unraveling was much larger than a wedding or HOA fine scandal. It was systemic. I shared everything with Detective Yates, who took it seriously. A search warrant was issued for Brian's listed business office, which turned out to be an empty suite in a shared commercial space with no signage and no recent lease activity. But the landlord provided security footage, and there he was, Brian entering, with a backpack once 3 weeks ago, and then again only 5 days earlier. They were close to catching him, but they had to move carefully. Meanwhile, we learned Karen had been released on bail pending trial and had immediately gone dark. Her home was empty. Her social media was scrubbed. But reports from neighbors Placed her scene around the property late at night, possibly trying to retrieve hidden files or tech. I installed more cameras and slept with my phone on loud. It was during this tense lull that Evelyn called me again, her voice shaking. "Someone's been in my garage," she said. "Nothing taken, but things moved." We checked her security. Feed and caught a shadowed figure with a ball cap, the same build as Martin Kendrick, slipping into her yard through a side gate. That was the final straw. We held an emergency neighborhood meeting at the old Pine Creek Lodge. Over 100 residents showed up. Dana and Marcus helped me set up a screen to walk everyone through what we knew, what we'd found, and what was next. I presented the files from the USB drive, the testimony from Jenna, and even the surveillance photos of Martin. With a question: do we want to keep letting people like this control where we live, or are we ready to dissolve the HOA and rebuild something transparent and fair? The vote was unanimous. Pine Creek residents were done with the old guard. The following day, Dana filed a formal petition to dissolve the HOA under the state's Community Governance Act. With over 80% of homeowners' signatures and documented evidence of misconduct, we had everything we needed. But the danger wasn't gone. That same night, someone tried to break into my workshop. Luckily, Marcus had reinforced the doors and placed motion sensors. The intruder fled before law enforcement arrived, but they left behind a pry bar and boot prints, which the sheriff's office collected. It only strengthened the case. The county commissioner got involved, publicly declaring, "The situation in Pine Creek, a cautionary tale of unchecked power in residential governance." The media frenzy reignited. This time, with a deeper focus on the wider implications, other communities stepped forward with similar stories. It wasn't just Pine Creek. This was happening across the state. Karen, Martin, and Brian had opened a door no one could close now. A week later, while reviewing the documents once more, Marcus found something we'd overlooked: unfiled HOA proposal labeled Phase 2 expansion. It included property plots beyond Pine Creek's limits, targeting adjacent lands under the pretense of rural integration. One of the targeted plots? My land. They hadn't just used my ranch for a wedding. They were trying to absorb it permanently under HOA controls, something only possible if the proposal passed and the documents were filed, which they hadn't been yet. We immediately contacted the county recorder's office and froze all pending applications under Karen's name. If those proposals had been accepted before the scandal broke, I could have lost legal ownership of part of my land without even realizing it. That discovery shifted the investigation once again. Prosecutors added attempted land theft and falsification of public records to the list of charges. Dana updated the civil lawsuit to include damages for unlawful property use and malicious prosecution. It was building toward something monumental. But the one piece still missing was Brian. Until one afternoon, Evelyn burst into my workshop holding her tablet. "He's here," she said. "Look." It was a live video from her Ring doorbell. Brian, unkempt, nervous, had come to her house pretending to be a county surveyor. He wore a reflective vest and held a clipboard, but his face was unmistakable. Marcus and I rushed over while she called the sheriff. We caught him in the act, standing at her property line pretending to measure. He didn't run, just looked at me, defeated. "It was supposed to be simple," he muttered as the sheriff cuffed him. "We just wanted a better place. Controlled, clean." Didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. With Brian in custody and the case now ballooned into a major legal event, Pine Creek entered a new chapter. The courts fast-tracked the civil and criminal cases. Karen's trial date was set, and a task force was created to review HOAs across the state. Marcus, Dana, and I formed a temporary resident committee to guide the community until a proper governance model could be voted on. People smiled more now. Kids played outside again. Neighbors who never spoke before now shared meals and offered help with repairs. And as for my land, it remained minute-touched, protected. But one night, just before bed, I found another envelope taped to my barn door. Inside was a single photo, the wedding, full view, with the handwritten words, "Will be back." The handwriting didn't match Karen's or Brian's or Martin's. Someone else was still out there. The photo was printed on high-gloss paper, and the scrawl across it wasn't rushed, it was deliberate. "We'll be back." I stared at those words under the porch light for several minutes, the night air unusually silent around me. There was no return address, no fingerprints, and no sign of who left it. Whoever it was had come onto my land, again, quietly enough to avoid the censors. The implication was clear. The problem wasn't just Karen or Brian or Martin, it was something deeper, a mindset, a network of people who believed they could control others for profit. I brought the photo to Marcus, who ran a series of scans but came up empty. "Whoever left this knows what they're doing," he said. "It's not just a taunt. It's a warning that someone's still out there, watching."
At night I
barely slept. The next morning I met with Dana, Marcus, and Evelyn in the community center, which had now become our de facto command post. We laid out everything. We had documents, timestamps, HOA rosters, external contacts, everything Karen had touched. When Dana noticed something unusual. In the budget reports for the previous year, there was an unaccounted for payment, $9,800, labeled under Special Events Security. No invoice, no explanation. The payment had been routed through a bank in another state, and the account was tied to a firm called Dissolution LLC. Evelyn searched public records and found nothing. Marcus took over and dug deeper into the network. Rooting it was a shell company, another layer in the structure. But buried within archived metadata was a contract reference linking Osprey to a group known as Urban Asset Coordination, a name that triggered Marcus's memory. He pulled up an old training file from his days consulting for federal agencies and found a Turban Asset. Coordination was a known front organization for off-book property enforcement operations, usually linked to aggressive land acquisitions and redevelopment scams. "They're not just rogue HOAs," Marcus said. "They're part of a larger private syndicate that poses as property improvement councils. Karen may have been recruited by them, or where she was working for them. All along, the pieces fell into place fast. The rushed violations, the attempts to acquire land, the push for HOA expansions, all methods commonly used to force property turnover at below market value, with legal gray areas exploited until residents either gave up or sold out. And now that Karen was removed, the syndicate was testing the waters to see if they could scare Pine Creek into submission again. I made a decision right there. This wasn't just about restoring my property or even the community. It was about preventing this operation from ever resurfacing. We gathered the evidence, every traceable record, and gave it to Agent Yates, who escalated it to the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs. They were already forming a task force to investigate HOA corruption across state lines. As that effort gained momentum, Pine Creek moved forward with dissolution. The final vote was cast in the town square on a warm Saturday morning. It was symbolic, but powerful. As the last ballot dropped into the box, a cheer went up from the crowd. The HOA was gone. In its place, we established a cooperative neighborhood committee, voluntary, transparent, with rotating leadership and open records. The first act of the committee was to declare all Corinera amendments void. The second was to pass a resolution stating that no future governance body could claim authority without full community consent and external oversight. The weight lifted from Pine Creek was immediate. Could feel it in the way people greeted each other. The new energy in local projects, the laughter of kids in yards now free of invisible restrictions. And on my ranch, I started rebuilding not just fences and gates, but trust. I hosted a community barbecue, inviting everyone, even the ones who once sided with Karen. Most showed up, some awkward, some embarrassed. But healing began that evening. Under the string lights, we draped across the property. People brought dishes, shared stories, and toasted to a new beginning. But the story wasn't over. That same night, Marcus got a call from an old contact in federal cybercrimes. The syndicate had resurfaced in 2 other communities across state lines, using similar tactics under new names. Osprey Solutions was just one of many shells. The contact said something else. Karen had vanished from her court-ordered location. Her GPS ankle monitor went dark for hours prior. She'd slipped away. Authorities launched a search, but the truth was obvious. Someone helped her escape. And it wasn't some rogue assistant. It was organized, funded, intentional. Rebuilding, Marcus said quietly. But this time, we know what to look for, so we didn't wait. We partnered with a national legal aid group focused on HOA abuse. We wrote detailed documentation, shared all evidence and strategies, and began speaking at town forums. Pine Creek became the case study. News outlets ran follow-up exposes titled "The HOA That Went Too Far" and "The Ranch Wedding" that exposed a national scandal. Dana launched a nonprofit called Home Free, focused on protecting homeowners from coercive governance. Evelyn became a local hero. And I finally stood on my front porch, looking out at my ranch, knowing that everything we built, our land, our community, our peace, had been fought for and earned. That's when I found the final letter. Folded into my mailbox, no name, no stamp, just a handwritten note. "You may have one here, but this isn't over." I smiled, pocketed the note, and whispered, "Then you better be ready." Because Pine Creek had become more than just a neighborhood. It was a warning, a story, a movement, a line in the sand. And if anyone ever tried this again, they'd be facing a community that knew how to fight back with law, with truth, and with unity. So if you've ever been bullied by an HOA, pressured by fake authority, or threatened for standing your ground, know this: you're not alone. And stories like ours are just the beginning. If this story inspired you or opened your eyes to the hidden power plays in local communities, make sure to subscribe to the Sham Story YouTube channel for more real stories that expose, empower, and entertain. Because the next one might be your own.